I'm going to talk about the human portraits of Ben Marshall. Marshall achieved more fame for his equestrian portraits, but his human portraits are an interesting subset of his work. This is a project that started many years ago, as Kate said. In 2004, David Fuller submitted the biography of Ben Marshall to the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. David was the former managing director of Ackermans, the leading sporting art gallery at the time, and an art advisor to the BSAT for many years. As a follow-up, David suggested an essay on the human portraits of Ben Marshall. With the help of Dr. Robert Fountain, he compiled a list of 54 human portraits, about a fifth of the known works by Marshall. Much of the work was done, but for many reasons, the essay was never produced. I thought it would be a good idea to finish the project in memory of David, who died last year, and for his contribution to the Trust. David broke the... Oh. It's not moving on, Kate. Oh, there we are. David broke the 54 portraits down by sport, with 7 non-sporting subjects and 5 of his family. I'm going to start with this postage stamp from my juvenile stamp collection. It's for the British Empire exhibition of 1924-25. Little did I know how important this exhibition would be in the history of British sporting art. Lord Barnard of Raby Castle lent 2 pictures by Marshall to the exhibition. They hung in the gallery for Oil Paintings Retrospective Empire Building. I think that shows the importance of the exhibition and went to the heart of what they were aiming for. It was intended to strengthen the bonds within Empire, stimulate trade after World War I, and demonstrate British greatness at home and abroad. Looking back, it turned out to be the last hurrah for Empire, as the Empire was increasingly uninterested in Empire and what it stood for. The 2 pictures are Haphazard, the racehorse, on the left, and the Earl of Darlington's foxhounds on the right. The exhibition was important because it showed a renewed interest in sporting art, and secondly, in Ben Marshall. The Illustrated London News carried an article on Marshall described as a bygone sporting artist revived. Marshall was considered a long-neglected British artist whose work, after a century of oblivion, lately began to command high prices. Indeed, Lord Barnard took advantage of this market move almost immediately and sold Haphazard soon after. Alfred Munning singled out these 2 paintings for an article in Country Life, in which he compared the work of Marshall with that of George Stubbs. Not surprisingly, Munning suggested that Stubbs was the better artist, but he did have praise for Marshall. In commenting on Haphazard, he wrote, "We can see signs of hurry, of getting it done. The horse is alert enough and full of life, but the painting is thin and poor." He went on to declare, "There is a temperament all over it. See the beautiful paint in the figures. Marshall's figures are always better than his horses." So Munnings drew attention to the skill of Ben Marshall in the painting of human figures. He also admired Marshall's skill with composition. He wrote, "Marshall's artistic eye never seemed satisfied unless whatever he did had composition, and that of no mean order. His spacing was right." Again, commenting on Haphazard, he says, "Marshall has given good proportion to sky and ground. Even the placing of the starting post is there to an inch." I would add that his placing of human figures within his paintings often adds balance to the picture. Not much is known of Ben's early life and what might have been influencing him. However, I think there are 3 important points to take into account. The first is that he was born in Seagrave, Leicestershire. He was always a Leicestershire man. The second was that he was a schoolmaster in his early career. And thirdly, the Leicestershire link led him to the apprenticeship with Lemuel Francis Abbott, the portraitist in London. One of Abbott's most famous portraits is that of Nelson. Lord Nelson. The MP for Leicestershire, William Potchin of Barkby, recommending to his fellow artists from Leicestershire. This suggests that Ben's family was well connected and that he had shown some early talent, perhaps for portraiture. The apprenticeship was short-lived. Ben was successful in his likenesses and had his full share of public patronage. However, it is reported that he gave up portrait painting when he saw this life-size picture of the death of a fox by Saury Gilpin at the Royal Academy. Was this a Damascene moment? Did he, on seeing the picture, just change his mind and choose a different career? Later he quipped, I began to discover many a man would give me 50 guineas for a painting, his horse, who thought 10 too much to pay for the best portrait of a wife. And he followed it up when he was trying to explain why he'd moved to Newmarket in 1812. Why Newmarket? Surely that's a barren spot for fine arts. Marshall's reply, the second animal in creation is a fine horse. At Newmarket, I can study him in his greatest grandeur, beauty, and variety. But why not study man, the most noble of all? In that, I might find many superiors and many rivals, Marshall said. In the other few, since Stubbs and Gilpin have gone. These are good market reasons for making a switch from humans to animals, particularly horses and hounds. Better prices and less competition. But I suspect Ben was being a bit cavalier with the truth. A study of all his work shows there was no Damascene moment. There were 8 works of horses that we're aware of before we find the first human portrait. But the first portrait was an extremely important patron for Ben. This is William Taplin, the owner of the Equestrian Receptacle, Subscription Repository, Medical Dispensary and Operative Farriery in the Edgware Road. Taplin commissioned horse portraits from Marshall and hung them on the walls of the receptacle and encouraged his clients to take pictures from Marshall. And Taplin was well connected. He was a dashing young fellow on the town, adept at billiards. He seems to have followed everything but his profession as an apothecary until he had sown his wild oats. Most importantly, Taplin hunted with the Royal Buckhounds on Ascot Heath. I believe it is through Taplin that Ben was introduced to the royal family. As early as 1796, he was given an audience by their majesties, and in a schoolmasterly way, he gave advice to the Princess Royal on her drawings. Another portrait by Marshall that interests me is that of John Bowles, here seen with his arm resting on the skull of a horse. John Bowles was one of the earliest qualified veterinary surgeons, but he lived in Cambridge. On the 1st of May, 1811, 6 horses on Newmarket Heath drank from a poisoned well. 2 survived because they were treated with castor oil by the stable staff, but 4 died because they had to wait for John Bowles to arrive from Cambridge. Bowles had built up a fine reputation, but it was difficult for a vet at that time to operate in Newmarket. Gambling was an important source of income for the stables, and vets were seen as potential spies who could foil the most serious of vets. But the interest in the portrait is really the subject. He is an important professional man who, along with practicing sportsmen, were the subjects that attracted Ben. Studying these portraits, I suggest that there might be another way of looking at the portraits that Marshall produced. The first group are sportsmen and professional men in formal pose. Taplin and Bowles fall into this group, plus the sportsmen who are not being active sportsmen. Here are some examples. Jem Belcher, the champion of England in 1795. Another bare knuckle fighter, Gentleman John Jackson, champion of all England, 1800 to 1803. And John Gully, who was a bare knuckle fighter who went on to be an MP and racehorse owner. This group of formal portraits is not confined to fighters. It includes James Tiny Edwards, a Chalkean trainer, who sired 6 jockeys himself from 3 wives. He trained from Palace House in Newmarket, so a direct link to the museum and the British Sporting Art Trust. And Sam Chifney Jr., who won 9 classic races, including 5 Oaks. But perhaps it is the closest friends that provide the most truthful and sympathetic portraits. Daniel Lambert was the famous fat man of Leicestershire. He and Ben shared a love of country sports. Lambert bred game fowl and dogs. He began to put on weight in his adolescence, but it didn't prevent him from taking up an apprenticeship as a die sinker and engraver in Birmingham. He inherited the role of keeper of the Leicester jail when his father died in 1791. He was made redundant in 1805, but retained a pension of £5 a year. However, he decided to earn a little more money by exhibiting himself at number 53 Piccadilly for 1 shilling a head. The close ties between Ben and Daniel were proven when Ben named his first son Lambert. Sadly, that son died after 6 months. And Lambert then died himself in 1809. They had to remove a wall from Stamford Inn, the Stamford Inn where he died, to get his coffin out. 2 months later, Ben had another son, again christened Lambert. And it is this Lambert that Ben would support and promote as a painter. I think the second group of humans that we can look at are the individual as a sportsman. Little is known about J.G. Shattuck, who described as the celebrated sportsman. This painting was exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1806. This is one of just 13 pictures that Ben exhibited at the RA between 1800 and 1819. Ben didn't have the confidence of the hanging committee and held all those associated with the RA in a kind of contempt. The next shooting portrait is interesting because of the fine detail that Ben included in the picture. It helps to date the picture and identify the subject. In the original catalogues, this was originally identified as a self-portrait dating from 1800 to 1805. As Judy Edgerton pointed out, this couldn't be such an early picture, simply because the gun has no percussion mechanism. It has a percussion mechanism. It's not a flintlock, which would have been the gun that was used in 1800. The clinching argument came in an engraving in the Sporting magazine in October 1825. This was of a pointer's head. The accompanying text said that the pointer belonged to Colonel Mellish, who brought him down from the north and left him with his training groom, Richard Prince. And as I said on the previous slide, Richard Prince was the 3rd generation of racehorse trainers at Newmarket. Edgerton described Prince as solidly professional, though hardly a gentleman. In such men, Marshall found congenial company. And I think that's a theme that runs through a lot of the work that Marshall produced. Amongst the congenial sitters was Thomas Hilton, the master of the provender hunt. The provender hunted roughly the area in Kent hunted by the Tickham. This provides a link to one of Ben's greatest supporters, the 3rd Baron Sons. When the provender ran into financial problems, Sons took it over. And Sons' house in Kent, Lees Court, is shown in the background. However, most of the work that Ben did for Sons was at Rockingham Castle in Northamptonshire. And it was on his way to Rockingham that Ben was involved in a serious coaching accident just outside Huntingdon. That was in September 1819. He was seriously injured. He did recover and his ability was not impaired. This painting is dated from 1822. The third category that I have identified is preparatory paintings for the inclusion in later paintings. There are two such pictures of jockeys in Lord Halifax's collection at Garraby in Yorkshire. The first is of the jockeys Tom Goodison in the black and white colours of Sir William Maxwell, and Bill Arnold in the orange and white colours of Mr. Neville. These were preparatory sketches for the paintings of the start and finish of the match between Philo Daputo and Sir Joshua on 15th of April for 1,000 guineas. You can see that Ben has faithfully reproduced the jockeys at the start, almost as they should be, with the horse at the right angle. And you can see again the positioning of the jockeys and how the sketches are translated into the finished picture. The other preparatory sketch in the Halifax collection is of 3 jockeys, Chifney, Wheatley and Robinson. The only picture that I've found so far that feature one of these jockeys is Sam Chifney, here seen on the 1818 Derby winner Sam. Sam was named after him and was trained by his brother William. The final group of portraits is by far the largest, and many were not listed in David's original classification, although this picture was included as a racing picture. The picture here was given to the BSAT by Paul Mellon in one of the first groups of paintings that he donated to us, and it was passed by us to the Tate to appear in their sporting gallery that had been promised at the time. It is now in the Tate collection. It is entitled Sir Charles Bunbury with his trainer Cox and a stable lad, a study for Surprise and Eagle. Sorry, Surprise and Eleanor. You can see the group in the bottom right-hand corner of the picture of Surprise and Eleanor before the start. But all is not right. And here I'm indebted to David Aldry, who's worked out what the picture is all about. The match between Surprise and Eleanor never took place. There was one small race that involved other horses, but no match took place, and trainer Cox had died. The correct title should be Before the Start of the Match between Sir Charles Bunbury's Eleanor, William Edwards Up, and Mr. H.F. Mellish's Eagle, Frank Buckle Up, on 31st of October 1804. The group of men is Richard Prince and James Frost, trainers of Eagle and Eleanor, with Eagle's lad. The taller figure is Richard Prince, and you can see this, I think, a similar pose in a contemporary print, not by Marshall, of Eagle entering the yard. I'm going to set out the supporting evidence for this change in title in the next BSAT newsletter. Having brought David Fuller's project back to life, I'm now more aware that it is work in progress and that more work can be done on the human portraits of Ben Marshall, particularly the 4th category of human portraits that appear as secondary figures to the main subject, often a racehorse. I think David was right to identify the human portraits as an important subset of Marshall's work. And for me personally, the project reminded me why I joined the BSAT. I was on my way to collecting, as Kate mentioned, over 18,000 books on the history and development of the thoroughbred and its horse racing worldwide. But there was detail missing. The study of the whole range of racing pictures, both good and bad, adds so much more to our understanding of racing history. The horses that were involved and how they looked, the personalities that were involved. And these are details that are not being picked up in the standard texts. It's been a good project to work on, and I hope I can extend it further. And I hope David would be pleased with the work and progress that we're making on his project. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. That was very interesting, particularly for me, and I'm guessing some of the other viewers today, as I know very little about Ben Marshall. So that was quite fascinating. One of the questions I have is, how do you go about identifying these paintings? Who is it that first raised an issue with the Eleanor and, I'm sorry, I've written it down, but Eleanor and Surprise Race? Who first raised an issue that that title was perhaps incorrect? And where did that title come from in the first place?
I think one has to give considerable credit to David Oldry. And this is not the only time that he's been studying a painting and found that there's fault with the title, or he's been able to identify a racehorse that has just gone into an auction sale, say as a brown horse looking left with jockey up. Often the details of the pictures have been lost in time, and the current auction houses haven't got the staff, or perhaps not the inclination, to take it further and try and identify horses, jockeys, trainers, and so on.
And you say that,
sorry, in this case, there were two clues as to a need for us to do further work. The first was that the trainer Cox was the famous trainer of Eleanor and predicted that she would win the Oaks, but he died a long time, or some time before the painting was made. So there was a suggestion that Cox wasn't involved. And I think the other thing is that identifying a sitter as, or a human in the picture as Sir Charles Bunbury was a little unwise. It's rare at this time that racehorse owners would appear in pictures with their horses. It tended to be the trainers and the grooms. So that was the first clue for further work. And then the second was that checking the races that Eleanor and Eagle took place in, or Surprise, there was no race, no match that involved Surprise and Eagle. So we had to then go, and Eleanor, so we had to go on and try and identify the race, which is what David did.
And where do those original titles come from?
Say it again.
Where do the original titles come from? The incorrect titles. Where do they come from?
I think they come through tradition. I'm sure looking at them, there are a lot of guesses being made. For example, even in the last 2 weeks, I had correspondence with a lady in Italy who couldn't make sense of a particular picture. And when we'd done all the work, it was obvious that they'd identified the wrong horse. And once we'd made the identification, then it was easy to get the auction house to change the title.
Okay. Okay. Now we have two questions that will sort of run one straight after the other. The first one being, did Marshall paint any of the wives of his sitters, even if they weren't as lucrative? And are there any examples of that?
Paint any of the which sitters?
Of the wives of the sitters.
Wives. There's a picture of Mrs. Marshall, and I haven't, from memory, I can't remember any other. But I'm sure there must be many pictures that have either been lost or have not come into the public domain that would have been by Marshall. So there might have been other women that he painted, but from what he said, I doubt it.
Okay, and another one of our viewers has said, could you please give some more detail about Marshall's ability to portray both people and horses well, as opposed to many other horse artists that were terrible at human portraiture?
Well, I think I'm the one thing that suggests that it's a subject that needed studying was his early apprenticeship with Abbott, who was a significant portraitist in the late 18th century. He was a Leicestershire man, so there would be close ties. Abbott had great fame, as I said, with his painting of Lord Nelson, which I think is being hung at Greenwich at the moment, or is at Greenwich. So I think his training, and although we know very little about his early life, it does suggest if we put all the clues together, that he might have shown some talent as a portraitist, and that then was what recommended him to Abbott. But as I said, the apprenticeship was short-lived, and he went on his way. But I think he always showed an interest in the portraits, the human portraits.
And how did David Fuller select the 54 portraits that you mentioned at the beginning of the talk over however many more there were? How many are you aware of in the collection? And how did David select his 54?
I think the 54 are the ones that were identified in the catalogue raisonné that Aubrey Noakes produced in about 1977, something like that. So there was an existing list of pictures, and David has identified those as single sportsmen or single humans. I think David, has limited the subject, and that if we're looking for identifying the humans in his racing portraits, we can build up a longer list. But David was working from that list given by Noakes, and David was, I think, one of the authorities on Ben Marshall. He was the go-to man when he was managing director at Ackermans for identifying Marshall's pictures. So he had an interest in Ben as an artist.
Okay. Okay, well, I think that covers most of the questions that have come in. Thank you very much.
I was going to add two things that I thought have started to interest me. When I was looking at the portraits, and I'd got biographies of many of the individuals that were featured, that there is an interesting backstory in most of the pictures that most of the portraits that were painted by Marshall. Just in themselves, they're interesting people. They're not the good and the great, but they are professional men or sporting men, as I mentioned. So that was the first thing, and I think that project ought to be completed. I think the second is that, having identified the importance of humans within his pictures, trying to identify the humans in all the other racehorse portraits would be an interesting project, and something I, having got so far in completing what David set out to do, I think we can take it further, and it's one of those projects I hope I just don't leave by the wayside, that I do actually do something to complete.
Which I'm sure you will. And so are you volunteering?
Directions.
I say, are you volunteering to complete? Oh, I'm sorry, another question's just come in. Are you volunteering to complete this project? Would you refer back to for example, Robert Fountain, or?
I would be happy to. I think Robert is poorly now, so I don't think I would be finishing the project for David and for Robert. I think it's a worthwhile project, an interesting project, because I think Marshall has been underrated as an artist. You see all the, I mean, just looking at my library, the number of books that I've got on George Stubbs, and then I look at the titles for Marshall, and they come to 2 or 1.
Ah.
So there is a gap in the market, I think. And just as he was revived 100 years ago for the British Empire exhibition, I think maybe 200 years later, we could start the project again, try and revive it. As long as I don't get distracted by all sorts of other projects, yes, I'll continue the work.
Yes, limit yourself, please. Okay. Now I have a question, possibly the last one for today. No, we've got another one coming. You say that you're reclassifying the work done by David Fuller. So how was it originally classified? Was it very different from what you've done? Was there actually a clear classification, or did it just sort of all meld into one?
I think David, as I said right at the beginning, David chose a very simple classification system by sport or by subject matter. And then that would have led to a research on each of the individuals and their backstories, and so making the essay out of their stories. And I didn't feel that that was what, or it wasn't what I wanted to do, but it was also straying a bit from Ben Marshall's links to human portraiture. I don't think there's any right or wrong way of doing it. It's just the way one's mind works. And I just felt that rethinking what we were getting might illuminate a bit more the life of Ben. I think he was described very often as a jovial character. He was said to be idle because he didn't do any painting after his lunch or his what they call dinner at 2 o'clock. So I think he was roistering with his mates and friends. And that's how he lived his life. He was a very quick painter, as Munnings suggested when he was looking at Haphazard. And I think that that gave a clue as to the sort of men that Marshall was cavorting with, or in the pub drinking with. He wanted to be entertained, and he wanted to entertain, and I think that comes through when you rethink classifying the pictures in the way that I did.
Okay, so he was out to have a good time and make a few pence on the side by rustling up a quick portrait before lunch. So.
Yeah, well, I think it's almost like that. I think it's people were described as idle if they could work quickly. Marshall could work quickly. I don't think he was idle in the sense of not getting down to doing work. He did it quickly.
Yeah, it was just so he could nip down the pub. Absolutely. Our last question slightly follows on from that. Did Marshall train any of the next generation of horse artists?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
John Fernley was apprenticed. And again, that would point to a Leicestershire link. And also, I think it was Abraham Cooper also took some lessons from him. So I think, again, going back to his early career as a schoolmaster, I think he was quite happy to help and guide future painters. And he obviously did that for his son as well, who doesn't get much credit for the work that he did, but it was somebody that Marshall was pushing. That's Lambert Marshall.
Yeah, Lambert, the second Lambert Marshall.
The second Lambert.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's another project coming for you, I feel. And then the second part of the question I've just asked is, who followed Ben Marshall as the leading horse artist?
Well, I think
Fernley, was it?
I think you go into the Victorian paintings, Herring, Burnley, Alkan. So you're starting to go into a blossoming of sporting art. And I think that's partly linked to an interest in the subject, but also the availability of print. So print technology started to broaden the market for sporting pictures. So you do start to see pictures like, painters like Fearnley and Herring emerging.
Well, I believe that's the last.
I just add, I just thought of it, that I think Marshall does have a style of his own, which is not replicated by those who follow. So he does stand out alone as having his own particular style, his way of putting the pictures together. And even for me, I start to be able to identify a Marshall picture, mainly because of the hats that are being worn at the time. So I think, although he fits in between Stubbs and Gilpin and Fearnley and Herring, he does stand alone in his own style.
And should perhaps be better known, maybe, for that. Okay, well, thank you very much for the talk and for answering all the questions. It was very, very interesting. As I say, I knew very little about Ben Marshall. I know a little bit more, and I will follow your project with interest.
You'll make me make it happen.
Perhaps we'll have an update at some point in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our talk today. We would all like to thank Tim for what was an extremely interesting talk. We don't have a date for our next talk yet. We are currently working on the summer series. So please look out for your e-newsletter, as there will be more information on that shortly. There should also be something in the printed newsletter, which you should be receiving in April, or certainly around that time. And there will be some more information about Ben Marshall that we didn't cover in this talk today, as Tim will be writing the essay for us this year. So something else to look forward to. I will pass on the details of the next talk as soon as I have them. So keep an eye out, and I really hope that you will join us again, and look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you. That concludes this afternoon's entertainment.
Thank you very much, Kate.
Well, thank you very much. Okay.